So this might be the most important video you've ever seen. And it's definitely going to be the most important video you've seen in 2025 so far, because this is why men don't try. And unfortunately, we have an epidemic of men who have essentially given up on their dreams, given up on their life. They decide to just get along to get along. They just do the least amount just so they can get a little bit of comfort. And that's it. And here I'm going to talk about the root causes of this. There's really four, and I'll also talk about what you can do to get out of this rut. Because once you get into this rut, this not trying momentum, it can be exceptionally hard to get out. But let's go through this list. Number one is the modern world. Now, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, and that's not what this channel is about, but the modern world is designed to keep you enslaved, essentially. It provides you low-level comfort and low-level stress. We'll say low-level comfort. So it keeps you at this low-level stress, low-level comfort dichotomy so that it's almost impossible for you to figure out, to even think about the concept of thriving, right? If you're just like, what do I have to do today? What do I have, what bills do I have coming up? What responsibilities do I have? You're never going to think, how can I improve my life? It's just, how do I put out the next fire, essentially. And in the modern world, not only does it provide you this low-level stress, it gives you the low-level comfort. It gives you the stress, and then the solution is things like video games or drugs or porn, shit like that. So it keeps you stuck in this just doing the least amount possible and getting the least amount possible. Turns you really into a cog in the machine. This is not where you want to be. So the second big thing that keeps people out, the second big thing that keeps people stuck is a petty ego. And I think this is probably one of the biggest ones. So this is better than average, or better than most. Now, this is where if you tell yourself that you're better than average, you're better than most people, then it's good enough for you. And the problem is that average is kind of shit. Other problems with this is you'll avoid risk. You're very risk averse. You won't do anything to go out on a limb where you could possibly fail. And therefore, you never take a risk. This is why you see people stay in their shithole towns, right? They never want to go out. They'll stay in the small pond and never venture out to the big ocean because in the small pond, there's less competition. They can surround themselves by losers and say, well, at least I'm better than these people. And it's really unfortunate because a lot of people who would otherwise be successful stay here. This is another comfort zone, right? They might be more or less trapped by the modern world, but what they're really trapped by is their own ego telling them to play it safe, to don't take any big risks, because if they did, they might fail. And they think they would look worse than the people who aren't even trying. So therefore, they try just a little bit. They try just a little bit more than average so they can say, hey, at least I'm not 30 pounds overweight. I'm only 20 pounds overweight. At least I'm not divorced. Instead, I'm in an unhappy marriage. Something like that. So petty ego. Very terrible. You'll see this a lot, man. This is like the small town syndrome. Lots of people who stay in their small towns, they get stuck. Even people who move to big towns, but then just stay there. Petty ego thing. It's like they had to prove to themselves that they were better than the people where they were born at. So they may have moved to the big city, but then they never got beyond that. Number 3 is, we'll call this trauma. Put you there. And this is when people feel like they're not good enough for success, right? I'm not good enough. Or I don't deserve success, therefore they never try. It's like if you feel like you are inherently a bad person, or if you feel like you have these major character deficits, then what's the point of even trying? And that's where you get this. Now, this can come from a lot of places. It could become from overbearing parents or people telling you you weren't good enough as a child, lots of bullying as a child, things like that. But whatever the case may be, they heard these external messages from the world, they internalized it, and now they believe that there's no point. They've maybe faced rejection in the past, and that's really affected them, and they didn't want to feel that again. So now, to avoid this sort of pain, to avoid re-experiencing the pain of their childhood, they just shut themselves in. They play video games, things like that, and they don't even try. It's very sad to see, and this is probably the hardest nut to crack, because really with all of these, nobody can help you but yourself, right? Nobody's going to be able to talk you down from these ledges. It really has to be something where you get sick of your situation and you decide you've had enough. And I'll talk about how to remedy each of these in just a moment. Now, number 4 is, this one's hard too. This is culture. This is actually probably the easiest because you can kind of recognize this yourself. You can see when you're in a shit situation and the people around you are holding you down. But you get this a lot in like Africa and Asia. You get this sort of communalism, right? Where standing out is a bad thing. And being an individual is a bad thing, so you never take risks. And moreover, the people who do take risks, they have to share the rewards with everybody who didn't take a risk. That's a lot of shithole country. Yeah, that really explains like a lot of the world's problems. Is you have these countries with a communalist culture where most people don't try because, again, you don't want to stand out from the crowd. But if you do try and if you do succeed, you have every one of your family members and every one of your neighbors expecting a handout. Oh, you have a little bit of money. Why aren't you giving me some? You're a bad person if you don't. And that disincentivizes becoming excellent. So culture is a big one. And the only real way to get out of this is to change your environment. I'll talk about that more in just a second. But so this culture, if you're part of, if you're raised in an Asian household, and you might be, if Asians, they tend to be like, you have to be a doctor or something like that. They want you to succeed in some ways, but it's not your way. It's not your program. It's the program that your parents are raised by or your community is raised by. So you get this a lot. You get a lot of really unhappy people in places like Asia. And then that's more of like the communalist, you can't be an individual. And then you get a lot of really fucking poor people who never develop anything in places like Africa because everybody wants a spoil of the reward without doing any of the work. So I'm sorry if that offends some people, but that's the way it is, right? Like throw a lot of aid to Africa and all they get is new Land Rovers, right? So the kind of culture of some places really disincentivizes putting in an effort, right? Whether it's because you don't want to stand out, you don't want to look different, you don't want to potentially fail, or because if you do succeed, then now you have everybody coming at you wanting a handout. So culture is another big reason why men don't try. So these are the big reasons. This isn't too prevalent in the United States or Western Europe, but a lot of work, consume the goy slop sort of stuff, low level stress, low level comfort, that's prevalent around the world. Petty ego, this is a big one, especially middle America sort of thing. I'm better than everybody around me, barely, but I still am shit, and I don't want to admit that. So I'm going to just avoid the risk, and I'm just going to tell myself at least I'm not terrible. And then the trauma. This is another big one. If you had overbearing or neglectful parents even, it will program you to think that you don't deserve success or you're not capable of it. Therefore, you won't try. Now, let's talk about the solution. I'm getting some text messages. Who's hitting me up? Send out what the? I swear, modern world is crazy. So, solution time. Now, this is important because we can talk about the problems all day, but if we don't talk about solutions, then, what are you going to do? So, really, they come down to a few things. We'll say, a big one is rejecting social conditioning. Right? You have to be kind of a rebel to do great things. And part of that rebellion is actually putting in an effort, right? The place where I'm from has a huge obesity rate. Not very obese. It's part of it because maybe some of it is stemmed at the beginning from ego, but it's also because I was able to reject the norm, right? I decided I wanted to have a better life. So I'm going to reject what's normal. I'm not going to accept the low level stress and bask in the low level comfort. So rejecting social conditioning is another one. Another one is loving yourself. This one would go more here. Loving yourself enough to succeed. Without being trapped by your ego. Now that's a balancing act, right? Because on one hand, you have to say, I deserve the best, but that means that I have to do more than just be better than other people, right? And the ego is, I don't have to be the best. I just have to be better than everybody else. And as long as you can limit the scope of who everybody else is, then you can get along without trying very hard. But if you want to be your best self, you have to love yourself. You have to believe that you deserve success. And you have to walk that line of not dipping into too much comparison with other people. So, like I said, loving yourself, believing that you deserve the best. Another thing, and this doesn't necessarily go right here, but self-responsibility. We'll put that here. You have to realize that you are responsible for you, not your shithole community. And nobody else from your community is going to come and rescue you, right? You can't depend on your parents. You should pretend like your parents are dead. I know that sounds harsh, but you need to have this attitude where you don't owe your parents anything. You don't owe them to become a doctor, and they can't affect your life choices. You don't have to supply them with children if you don't want to, but you need to understand that at the same time, they're not there to rescue you. They are not going to come and swoop in and save you from your own apathy by providing you shelter and food and that sort of thing. So you need to be highly self-responsible in terms of making an effort, adjusting as you go, being consistent, those sorts of things. Finally, you need to, and this really goes down to here and here, but you need to take control over your environment. And if you can't take control over your environment, you need to move to a better environment. Now, I know I'm going to get some people in the comments or online who are going to say, well, you shouldn't run away from your problems. Bullshit, right? The number one way throughout human history that people solved their problems was they picked up and they moved to a new environment. Always been the case, always will be. The easiest thing to do to change your mental programming is to put yourself in a different environment, surrounded by better people, or just in a different environment that forces you to be better. Now, if you can't do that, or if it's not convenient, you need to take massive control over your environment. You need to make sure that your living area is set up for success, right? I have a TV right here. It's unplugged. I don't think I've ever turned this TV on, right? Why would I even have it plugged in? I'm never going to use it. Again, if it was up to me, I wouldn't even have the TV. But same thing, you need to be keeping your place in a manner that helps you succeed. If you want to not be fat, you don't keep junk food in the fridge, for example. You need to curate the sort of people that you hang out, so you're not hanging out with losers and people who bring you down. So taking control of your environment is huge. And if again, probably even better, change your environment. But this is how you get out of this rut. Because again, like if you're too swayed by the modern world, and if you're too enamored with your own ego, with your own idea of who you are, and if you are raised in a traumatic situation, if you've been too affected by that, and if you feel like you're not enough, or if you are part of a culture that tells you not to be an individual, that tells you you must serve your community, then it's going to be really easy for you to, maybe I'll become a doctor, but other than that, I'll study hard, and then you won't even try. You'll just do the bare minimum necessary. You'll never have the life that you actually want. So how do you break free out of this rut? Well, here's how. First, reject the conditioning. Understand that these are just stories, right? They're not real. The morality of the modern era is just a story we tell ourselves to make people obedient and nothing more. It doesn't even serve you half the time. It serves those in power or those who have historically had power. So reject the social conditioning. Take control over your environment or change your environment. Start loving yourself in a way that you understand you deserve the absolute best for yourself, and not just to think of yourself as slightly better than other people. And finally, have responsibility for making that happen, and don't worry about other people. So I hope this helps. You're welcome.